I've come to the University of Westminster, right here in the centre of London, to meet a researcher called Dr. Brad Elliot, who's made a very surprising discovery about exercising. We all know that exercise is good for us. Let's find out how. So Dr. Elliot, thank you very much for giving me your time to speak to you. Can you tell me a little bit about what new discovery you've just made in your lab, please?
Sure thing. So first off, thank you for having me. Great to be here. Everyone knows exercise is good for you, right? But we were interested in what specific type. We recruited a group of 70-year-olds who'd been exercising for at least 30 years regularly. We could document this. One group did resistance training regularly, so weightlifting, building muscle in the gym. Yeah. The other group was cyclists. They cycled frequently every week. So for example, 100 kilometers was normal to them. We had another group who was 7 years old as well, didn't do any exercise. Then we had a young group to compare them.
So you had four groups. You had weightlifting,
yep,
cycling, older people, and younger people.
Exactly.
Okay. Younger people.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so the important thing was that we had groups of old people who were all the same age, but had vastly different lifestyles over the course of their life. We then went in and had a look at how strong they were, how fit they were, and did a whole bunch of measures of how healthy they are. And one of the take-home points we found really interesting was the cyclist group was, on average, a lot more healthy when we looked at all the health measures than the resistance training group. And even more interestingly, we looked at how much muscle mass they had and how strong they were. The cyclist group was actually stronger, which initially was actually really counterintuitive, because you'd think groups that lift weights and grow muscle would have more muscle into older age. And in fact, it was the opposite. The cyclists did much better.
How is it that you can measure someone's fitness? How do you put a number to that? What sort of things do you measure in the lab?
So we use a battery of tests that measure someone's fitness overall. We can put them on treadmills. We can measure their respiratory rate and how much oxygen they pull out of the air and how efficient they are at that. We measure their strength. We measure how much muscle they have by scanning different parts of their body.
Yeah.
We can do old-fashioned ways, like putting a tape measure on someone's arm and doing that kind of simple measure. But often the simple measures are the most accurate. So we use a whole range of different tools.
And what were the major results that came out of this new study?
We had two major findings. One was that the cyclists maintained muscle mass in the older age better than resistance trained, which was quite counterintuitive. We're really excited by that. But the second one was really interesting. So we took blood from all of our different groups and we compared them to thousands and thousands of different hormones. Some we know about, some we know what they are. Some people have heard of, like testosterone and growth hormone, but the vast majority of them, we have no idea what they were. We haven't even heard of them before, really studied them. And what we're trying to do now with modern AI models is take all that data and pull it together and understand the process of aging, how that affects us individually. And we're not quite finished yet. It's an ongoing study, but what we're trying to do is tease out the effect of the environment, how you live, especially how you exercise, versus just the effect of aging alone. And so what we can do is see if things change in all of our older groups, despite everything they've done. This is the effect of time on biology, independent of your lifestyle. Yeah. We're really excited to try and pick those two things apart.
So you found a difference between people who lifted weights and people who did lots of cycling. Both sets of people were very fit and healthy, but you found a difference in aging. What do you think might have been behind that? What's the cause?
So one of the things we think is behind that cause and the difference in muscle mass and muscle strength between the people who did resistance training and the people who did cycling, that counterintuitive finding that the cyclists kept muscle mass better into older age, is that muscle in people has two major divisions, two major types. We call them fast twitch and slow twitch fibers. Slow twitch fibers are those we use for aerobic exercise, like cycling. Fast twitch are the ones that grow big and strong with resistance training, like weightlifting. Yeah. Those fast twitch fibers that grow faster and get bigger in weightlifting also atrophy or lose mass quicker. So what we think we're seeing is weightlifters over the course of their life gaining lots of muscle mass quickly, which is great in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. But as they age, the inherent biology of aging means they're losing muscle mass faster. The cyclists don't gain as much muscle in terms of total bulk because they're primarily these slower twitched fibers they're training. But even though they don't gain as much, in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, they're not losing it as fast. So these slow twitch fibers, we think, are more resilient to this aging process. And that's why into much older age, 70s and 80s, like our group were, we're seeing this maintenance of muscle mass.
Is it is it always the case that muscle grows with either fast twitch or slow twitch, or can you have a muscle that develops both kinds of fibers at the same time?
Yeah, so the constituent of muscles is a mix of fast and slow twitch fibers. And different people have different mixes. Some of it's genetic, but about half of it is genetic and half of it is environment, we think. And so environment is your training primarily. So if you do lots of sprint training or power training, you lift heavy weights, your fast twitch fibers grow bigger and they become more predominant. If you do lots of aerobic training like cycling and running and that type of thing, the slow twitch fibers, they become predominant. That was a crappy answer. I might have another crack at that. That was awful.
Yeah.
So people have a mix of slow and fast twitch fibers in their muscles. And everyone has a different ratio. Some of it's genetic, some of it's the environment, like you're training. When people train resistance or power, they build those fast twitch ones that get big and strong. When they do lots of cycling or running or aerobic activities, the slow twitch fibers predominate. We know it's about half genetics and half environment.
And if you do both, if someone is does lift lots of weights and does lots of sort of fast twitch squat thrusters or something to build up their leg muscles, but then also does lots of long distance cycling, is there then competition in the muscle as to which fibers grow, or can you have both in equal amounts?
Exactly, you can have both equal amounts. And in fact, the NHS guidelines for the general population is do aerobic style exercise for at least half an hour every single day, if you can. And if you can, do resistance style training at least twice a week. We know both types of exercise are good for you. To be clear, both groups were better on average in any health measure than our inactive population. Yeah. Of course they were. But the NHS guidelines, while they seem simplistic, are actually based on a huge amount of evidence. And we know that to be the case, that lots of aerobic exercise, at least every day if you can, plus occasional resistance exercise is probably best for long-term health, long-term well-being, and longevity in the long term as well.
Okay. So how might this discovery be used for the general population? What message would you give people as to how they could live a healthier life and age better?
So the message we have is not surprising, believe it or not. Apparently exercise is good for you. Who knew? But what we've done is we've started to pin down types of exercise. We now know that aerobic style exercise, that exercise that gets you out of breath but you can maintain for half an hour to an hour, that long-term exercise is good for you. And it's good for you the more you do, the better it is. So while some is good, more is better. One of the things that's emerging from this study and other studies like it is we know that resistance training is of course also good for you, but up until a point. So after about 2 or 3 sessions a week in a gym lifting heavy weights, we are seeing on a population scale, maybe that good effect is plateauing.
Yeah.
So again, we come back to this idea of NHS guidelines being active every day is good for you, and also doing a little bit of resistance training a couple of times a week. Sounds simple guidelines, but heavily based in evidence, which is actually quite important to understand.
Brad, can you tell us what your name is, what your role is here at the university?
So my name's Dr. Brad Elliot. I'm a senior lecturer in physiology here at the University of Westminster, and here I study how people can live healthier, longer lives by understanding the biology of aging in humans.
What sort of exercise would you recommend people should be doing?
There's lots of answers to that question, believe it or not. People ask me what type of exercise should I do all the time. We know that aerobic style exercise, endurance exercise like cycling and running and walking is great for you. Where some is good, more is better. We know resistance style exercise like lifting weights in a gym is good for building muscle mass. But we also know that the type of exercise that's good for you is the type that you're going to keep doing. So I can stand here and say you should do exactly this style of exercise. And if you hate it, it's not going to work for you. So one of the most important messages I give people is the type of exercise you'll be doing in 10 years' time or 15 years' time. That's the type of exercise that's good for you. Not the current trend, but what you're going to maintain for years or decades.
Well, thank you ever so much for that, Brad. That was absolutely fascinating.
It was an incredible pleasure to be here, Lewis. Thank you for having me.